Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for attending our cybersecurity specific webinar. Just to cover our bases as a starting point, we've covered the introduction. We'll discuss the current risk landscape and how truly the risk has been has exponentially grown over the last 2 or 3 years. It's something that we track closely, and we'll cover that. We'll also talk about passwords, advanced authentication methods, ways that you today can improve, your cybersecurity kind of stance and certainly mitigate a lot of the risk that's just inherent in being online today. We'll talk about permissions and viewing privileges, how you can use some of the software tools in both Abacus Private Cloud and, of course, the Abacus Law software to protect your client data and firm data using the software tools that are available to you. We'll touch on encryption controls, how important that is, and at the end we'll save a little bit of time for a Q&A. So at any point as we kind of cover these topics, if a question comes up or it's something that's been on your mind, there's a nice kind of question section or feature of the GoToMeeting or the GoToWebinar control panel. So make sure you type in your questions as we go along at any point, and we'll be happy to spend some time at the end covering those. Okay, so let's talk about the current risk landscape. Why you? Why are you a target? Well, you are online, right? I know that's a little glib, but the truth is we all are today, right? It's a necessity in doing business. Because we're online, we have many different methods or controls or needs to protect sensitive client data. That's information that's sent to us, that we send, to clients. There's many requests. Third parties are often involved based on the nature of the practice. But that client data and its sensitivity and your kind of ownership or stewardship of it means that preventing its disclosure has value, right? That value makes your firm a target, right? Not only for ransomware, but other kind of attacks and cyber breach attempts. Also, your work is deadline-based. The idea of your firm, your technology, your access to information that you store and kind of, aggregate on a daily basis, a lack of access to it, disruption can affect your bottom line. Not only your ability to kind of provide services to your clients, but also to meet deadlines and know even when those deadlines are coming. As we rely more on technology and leverage it to kind of help us organize this great deal of information, it becomes, an attack point for us. Also, the profile of law firms, a lot of the attacks that we're seeing, especially over the last year, are phishing, right? It's emails that purport to be from a third party that you have some trust in or that you have a need for, for those third-party services. It's a way of knowing who you are and better targeting, let's say, those attacks against your firm. And finally, just a cost-benefit analysis. We talked a little bit about the disruption aspect. How long can you be offline? What kind of methods do you have in place where you can leverage technology for disaster recovery or to restore your entire environment after a breach attempt? Those are really kind of a summary of why you are being targeted, right? And ransomware is one of the things we speak to regularly. Of course, it is a for-profit global criminal enterprise. It is extortion in essence. There was over $5 billion in revenues paid in last year, in 2017. Also, the fact that it's growing and becoming more successful is because law firms and other businesses are being targeted and are paying the ransom. Many firms are not in a situation where they have controls and protections in place to, one, ward off these cyber breaches and these attacks, but also if you are attacked and if you are breached in some way, many firms simply do not have a proactive strategy for protecting themselves. Also, you're a target because there are high regulatory and compliance standards, HIPAA and HITECH. A lot of the information you store and you kind of assemble for your clients immediately make you required to comply with those standards. Also, your professional reputation, right? The high duty of care, that attorney-client privilege is something that makes you a target. Also, some of the attack vectors, the way that you'll know or that you'll see attacks is via phishing emails, right? An email comes in, it links to ransomware. Somebody in the firm, it just takes one person to click on it to spread that attack throughout. Also, a lot of these files, because ransomware is really a hotbed of innovation, the files themselves and the way that the ransomware is delivered can make its way past your antivirus program. So we'll talk a little bit about antivirus in the future and how that's kind of built into The Abacus Private Cloud with Endpoint has a good way of kind of managing or mitigating that. But what we're seeing is a lot of drive-by downloads or web ads. So literally just going to a web page could be an exploit where some ransomware is installed. And then some of the other things we're looking down the road, the Internet of Things, everything from, the Alexa that is always listening, to a baby monitor, to, a webcam, to a thermostat, to a toaster, all of these different things that are Internet connected and are listening in some way, either, to give you control over, those devices when you're remote, let's say, or anytime you have Internet connection using your smartphone or something like that. Who has access to that information, where it's stored, and how it's secured? Those are some of the unanswered questions currently that we're seeing. And I think in this coming year, 2018 and beyond, all of those internet-connected devices that we rely on a daily basis, both at home and in the firm, those will become additional attack vectors. Okay, so if that's kind of setting the scene a little bit, I want to kind of give you a glimpse, at least, at a couple of phishing emails that we've seen. One purports to be from FedEx, uses exact same language, exact same kind of format, things like that. Another one is coming from Apple Computer, from their support department, asking you, that your account information needs to be updated. Now, a lot of these may seem familiar to you because they're exact copies of the format and the content that would come directly from that individual, or that entity. But this is not coming from Apple. This is not coming from FedEx. These are the types of phishing emails that are a way to exploit your network and infect it, right? So that your data, your files, your programs, everything can be encrypted. So I want to touch on that as an idea of kind of the threat vectors, how these threats arrive, because part of how you protect yourself, how you mitigate yourself, how do you be leaning forward on kind of proactive cybersecurity is to understand the most common exploits, and you mitigate the risk of being exploited from them. I want to touch on that as a starting point. So now I want to transition into how we can focus. What are some of the tools available to you to help you be proactive in both knowledge and awareness of where you stand, what your stance is from a cybersecurity standpoint, and what tools you have, both today and that you can kind of implement going forward to help yourself be more proactive and to help mitigate that risk as much as possible. So the first thing I want to touch on, and this is pretty standard, right? It is something that we're all familiar with, but it has to do with making sure that your password protocols, the passwords that you personally use, that everyone in the firm uses. I can't stress this enough. Unfortunately, this is something I hear all the time, where basic best practices to protect yourself, with that password being the first kind of line of defense, are not being followed by the majority of clients that I speak to. I just want to kind of stress or at least kind of call out how often we actually use passwords. And I'm an historian, so I did some research, and in 1961 was the first time a password was implemented at MIT in a computer, networked environment that they had created. And within a year, the first breach of that password happened. So, from the first time that individuals were using passwords to protect networks, breaches were also happening. Most of the time, those breaches happen because of user error, right? Somebody shares, somebody exposes, somebody does not follow best practices to protect themselves. Other ways we're using passwords daily: you sit in front of your computer, you log in, username and password. The operating system, the networks, the files and folders that you access regularly, even printers and things like that are all part of that kind of networked password chain. Your smartphones and the apps that are installed on those smartphones contain a great deal of information about you, and all of your email that you send, receive, all the documents that you share, all of that information is stored and protected, ideally by strong passwords across all of the kind of technology tools that you use regularly. Everything from software apps to your email programs, maybe multiple email addresses, multiple programs, even different ways of accessing your email, whether it be a browser, whether it be a program, whether it be your smartphone. Databases, another thing, being able to kind of protect your actual databases and all the websites you visit regularly. And finally, kind of ATMs, alarm systems. You may have an alarm system at the firm, Wi-Fi networks, and even point-of-sale terminals where you use your card and your PIN in order to kind of make a purchase. That's something that we do on a daily basis. And I want to touch on some of the Abacus Law password best practices. So, at the starting point, use strong passwords. A strong password simply means that its length, its complexity, right? So the length, I recommend 10 to 12 characters. probably 12 characters. Every time you add an additional character to your password length, it increases exponentially the protections. The complexity, making sure that you're combining or you're using alphanumeric characters. Capitalization can be very helpful. Throwing in other characters and avoiding, or actually I should say randomness, avoiding sequential numbering or the date or the year. Those kind of things that are easy enough to guess and certainly would be on the short list of information that somebody would be using if they're trying to exploit your password. And finally, this is something that I bring up, and this is kind of a pain point because I recommend strongly that everyone not only use strong passwords, but change them regularly. That could actually kind of, put some individuals off because too often they forget. What's my new password? What's the last one? How do I kind of update it? And they have to go through that process over and over and over. But my recommendation is to ensure that you do change your passwords. I change mine every 30 days, but I would recommend probably a 90-day window as the outside, time frame where you're using the same password. Now, I will touch on some other ways to maybe help you maintain your passwords, maintain your strong passwords, and remove some of the kind of inefficiencies or challenges that individuals have once you're required to kind of remember and apply strong passwords that are different, of course, for many different programs. Some of the ways that can help you remember these is to use a person action object. And really what that means is to create a passphrase. So it's no longer just some random string of numbers. Like there are programs that can help you create those regularly, and those are very strong, but they're very difficult to remember because there's no context. There's no personal connection to that string. So oftentimes using a person, let's say a part of a person's name, and an action, what did they do, and the object or where they were when they did it. That is something that is unique to you. It's part of your imagination, and really that is one of the stronger ways to not only create a strong password, but then be able to remember it, because the phrase is easier to remember than a string of numbers, right, or a string of numbers and characters. Also, as I mentioned, don't reuse or auto-save your passwords. And another thing that I'll touch on, in a moment is the concept of multi-factor authentication. And I can't stress that strongly enough. It's not only would like you to use strong passwords, but also deploy multi-factor authentication for, your private cloud connection to Abacus Law, to any of the other kind of programs that you use regularly, and roll it out across the firm. Because anytime you can remove that single point of failure, you're already protecting yourself significantly in a significantly stronger way. So here's the Abacus Law software. You can click on File, set up user preferences, and in your user info, there's that password. This gives you the ability to enter a strong password, update it anytime you need to, and something that I would recommend as a best practice in the Abacus Law software is to schedule a calendar event, right, for yourself in 30 days, 45 days, 90 days, whatever it may be, time to change your password. That's something where it removes the onus from you remembering necessarily or needing to remember that. Instead, your same, calendaring and case management system can also be proactive in reminding you to make sure that you're updating, not reusing, and entering strong passwords on a regular basis. So that's at its core, straightforward way to make sure that your user login also includes a strong password in the Abacus software, and that it's easy to deploy or implement that not only the initial password that you select to enter into the system, but also how often you choose to update that. Abacus can help you remember that. The next thing I want to touch on is the concept of multi-factor authentication. So if your password, right, is your key, right? It's how you access your infrastructure, how you access your databases, how you access your applications, your computers, and so on. I would strongly recommend that you implement multi-factor authentication. And what it is exactly what it sounds like. It requires multiple factors to gain access to your tools, your software tools. An example, kind of real world example would be your bank card, right, being the first kind of factor, and your PIN code being the second factor, right? Or, the key to the door, the lock on your door, and the deadbolt being a second factor, right? So really what it does is it removes a single point of attack because you cannot access a network or a program or, an infrastructure with a single credential. So the number of different ways that multi-factor authentication is described. First one is a disconnected token. That would be kind of a smartphone app. That's the idea of, you using your username and password to log into Abacus. Once you've initiated that kind of, login, it sends to your smartphone a second factor. It gives you the ability to approve or deny the login attempt. So that's a nice way to kind of leverage your smartphone that's always in your pocket as that second factor. A connected token would be a USB dongle. You can get those actually on Amazon and a number of different kind of tech websites, where you actually get a dongle that will have kind of a rolling numeric scheme, and the numeric kind of token on the dongle would be the one that you would use to log in. That would be the second factor. And the third one is kind of an inherence factor, and that's biometric security, whether it's your fingerprint or your voice or even kind of your face. Their 3D mapping of your face now is a good way to have a very accurate and easy to implement way of getting that second factor. And actually setting up multi-factor authentication is one of the things I do on a daily basis with clients. It's something that's available with Office 365, where you can set up, either your phone or via text, or there are a number of different ways to receive that second factor. But the nice thing for you from a kind of user case on a daily basis is you type in your password and you get that second notification. You click to verify and you're in. Or if if there are other attempts made with an incorrect password, you can also have it kind of send you additional kind of verification or at least notifications of that happening. It gives you that kind of control, or that added control of access to the different kind of software tools that you rely on regularly. So multi-factor authentication is an essential and available tool, along with strong passwords. It's something I think that can be deployed or implemented very, very quickly and easily. And that's something where certainly kind of reach out to us. We do that for our clients all the time. It's something that can improve your cybersecurity stance immediately. So some of the authentication best practices, strong passwords, as we touched on. And this is the other thing I want to touch on. I use, and actually here at Abacus, we use a password manager. 1Password or LastPass are a couple of kind of the industry leaders. But in essence, those programs give you the ability to protect and generate strong passwords for all of your accounts, and you use a password manager, ideally with multi-factor authentication, to manage all of them. So it's kind of a key string, or all the keys on your key chain are managed for you. I recommend looking into a password manager. Oftentimes that can kind of alleviate some of the challenges that come from needing to memorize and apply and use a full suite of strong passwords. You definitely want to use those strong passwords, but a password manager can help you organize and manage that on a day-to-day basis. Also, I touched on change your passwords regularly, utilize multi-factor authentication. There are also a number of different ways that we can help you also in the private cloud. For instance, authorization by MAC address, and that's kind of the hardware footprint of the devices that you use to access your secure environments. The nice thing about that is it's yet another kind of factor for authentication, where any attempts made using hardware, computers, let's say, that are not part of kind of the known profile will immediately be rejected. So it's a nice way for you to kind of control access in that way. Another way to kind of authenticate is through IP ranges. So it's based on where you are when you're connected to the internet, when you initiate those access attempts. Those are ways that we can help you kind of restrict, let's say, where and how individuals can access. So maybe that remote workforce would be within an approved IP range, and anyone outside of those locations or those ranges would automatically be rejected. So it's a good way for you to have additional authentication controls in your systems. I did want to touch on the Abacus Private Cloud security architecture, because clearly we've designed the private cloud to give you those controls that we were just describing, right? So your virtual desktop is consistent, the programs, the data, the files are protected within it. They're encrypted, they're backed up, and we removed a lot of single points of failure. So, the ability to authenticate yourself, the ability to deploy multi-factor authentication, all of that is built into kind of the architecture of the private cloud, knowing that your virtual environment is redundant across multiple geographically located data centers. So regardless of where you're connecting, you have your primary, and then you kind of have a mirrored location. So it's a nice way to make sure that you never have your eggs in one basket. So as you're using kind of the Abacus Law software and the Abacus Private Cloud, you know that you're protected, your data is protected, and you're not, even an access attempt or a breach would be mitigated, because it would be identified quickly by our teams who are monitoring in 24/7 the environment, and we can reach out to you for notifications at any time. And finally, the other thing that I'll touch on is endpoint antivirus protection. I touched earlier on the idea of antivirus, how sometimes, files can sneak their way through. But endpoint is simply the best way to deploy antivirus because it gives you administrative controls over how and when updates and patches and new information is rolled out throughout your network. So it's the concept of no longer having individual workstations have software installed and that software needing to be updated in a kind of piecemeal fashion. Instead, endpoint antivirus kind of pulls it all together and gives you the tools, administrative tools to update all devices and all kind of security profiles within that environment. So I strongly recommend that you utilize endpoint antivirus. So let's talk about some of Abacus Law's software security tools. Right, we talked about the strong password. So your user ID and your password are a good way, of course, for every account that's using Abacus Law in your environment to control access. Like at a starting point, your ID and password are required to connect and to log into the Abacus Law software. Some other important aspects of Abacus Law specifically are security profiles. So one of the things that's important is not only access, kind of yes/no access to the program itself, but security profiles are a great way in the Abacus Law system for you to control at a very granular level what individuals have once they log into the software. So you can actually go through and everything from adding new records to deleting records to what you can change and what you can view. What I strongly recommend as a best practice in utilizing kind of cybersecurity controls within Abacus Law is applying security profiles to individuals that only give them access to the information they need. It's kind of flipping the idea of access, right, where it's no longer just can you connect, yes or no. Instead, it's not only yes, you can connect with your secure, your strong password, but once you're in the program knows who you are, and based on your security profile, it will grant or restrict access and controls to certain features. It's a nice way for the firm as a whole to have peace of mind, knowing that we truly are granting access at a specific level, at a user-specific level, right? So it's a nice way for the firm to be able to create really any number of security access profiles. And of course, you can call us at any time and we'll help you walk through and kind of create them, fine-tune them as needed. But that's one of the nice ways of the program helping you manage who can do what. And of course, you can track that with the audit trail and the audit report. But more importantly than kind of tracking it, that's more of a reactive, kind of sleuthing as to figure out who did what when. Instead, security profiles are forward-facing, right? They're a good stance to ensure that individuals in the firm, when they log in, only have access to the tools, the information, and the features, the program features that they truly need. So security profiles, if you haven't rolled those out, or if you haven't looked at them recently, that's something that we can go through with you and create those permissions and really fine-tune what each individual can do in the program based on their role or responsibility. And of course, as we step backwards towards, kind of the front line of your defense, should a individual's credentials be accessed, maybe through a phishing email or something like that, the security profiles are a good way to control what someone can do or can't do using credentials that they may access. It's a very good way for you to protect yourself and the firm using, the security tools built directly in the Abacus system. Next is viewing privileges. So if we're kind of using that idea of a user account and then the security profile controlling what that user account can do in the program, excuse me, the viewing privileges in Abacus are a great way to control which records that individuals can see. So it's a nice way of being able to kind of go, from the very general access to the very specifically record by record. You can click the little kind of padlock up on the top of a record and control for a file exactly who in the firm can view this file or not view the file. And one of the nice things about it is not only can I go to, a list of matters, let's say, or a list of contact records and see or not see this record, but it won't show up in a search. It won't show up in a report. It truly is your ability either for, ethical wall, purposes, or simply to protect sensitive information or really control exactly who does or doesn't have access to information in your system. The viewing privileges are a nice way for you to control that at an individual record level, and you can even kind of build your ethical wall using tools that apply across the board. So it may be by, by department or by role, or even by individual. You have that type of control where your information, all of that kind of specific, protected, sensitive client data, you have a lot of controls over at a high level, who can and can't create records, who can and can't view records, and what can they do with the information, even if they are able to review it. They can't delete it, they can't print it, they can't copy it off, any of those kind of things. We can certainly help you kind of create those permissions, that very granular permission built into your own system, using tools like we're seeing here that are literally part of the Abacus program, and they're yours to deploy and implement now or any time in the future that you needed these types of controls to control individual bits of information, and within the firm on a user-by-user basis who has access to what. Okay. The next thing I want to touch on, and this is of great importance, and it's the concept of applying encryption to your Abacus Law databases. Now, built into the system options of Abacus is your ability to encrypt all of your data using AES 256-bit encryption. Now, AES 256-bit encryption will take something like, actually the number of years it would take for a brute force attack to decrypt or find the key is older than the date of the known universe, right? So it's extremely powerful encryption, and it's easy to implement in Abacus. So you can go into your system options, you can click on encryption, and you can enter your own password for your databases. Now, the reason this is important is in your environment, the data, should somebody come in and copy it, let's say, because you've applied this encryption, the data itself can be copied, but access to it would be impossible, right? So it's a nice way of making sure that not only on the front end side, from user by user and with security profiles, you're controlling who has access to what information in your system, but using the AES 256-bit encryption means that the data itself is not readable. So somebody couldn't just go to, a folder on your server, copy off certain files, and think that they then had, basically the keys to the kingdom, all contact records, all case information, all your documents. Instead, this level of encryption means that your data is protected. Your data is not readable, and it really means that the keys to viewing your data are held by you. So that encryption is something that I'm not sure if everyone has implemented, but it is a powerful protection for your data. All information in your Abacus system, once encrypted, is only available to you and is protected going forward, because it's only readable by not only the Abacus system using the key you have, but those files themselves are encrypted and would not be readable. So even a copied off version of it or a stolen version of it would be protected. Right? So it's a nice way for you to have that type of control over not only access controls, kind of permissions, but also, at a core level, at the database level, you're able to kind of protect your information. So this is yet another additional layer. So if you're in the Abacus Private Cloud, you do have encryption for data at rest and data in transit, the information that you're sending and receiving from that environment. This encryption is specific to the Abacus Law program, specific to the Abacus Law database, and really gives you that strong protection where the database itself is not readable and is protected by the keys that you hold. Okay, so we're kind of at the end of our webinar today, but I want to do a quick review and cover some next steps. First thing is, if you're not using strong passwords, go in and enter a strong password today, and set a calendar event to change your password regularly. Deploy multi-factor authentication. A quick call to us. We'll be happy to kind of walk through options with you. It's relatively easy to implement, deploy in your environment. But multi-factor authentication gives you next level security, really mitigates the risk of a breach. I would recommend using a password manager. We all have so many passwords to manage on a daily basis. These software tools are really a best practice. They help you maintain and manage strong passwords. They help you by prompting and requiring that you change your passwords regularly, and they give you an easier way to access those passwords in a program that's designed to do exactly that. Another thing that we touched on is only grant access permissions as needed. So even within the firm, start to think about who really needs access to what, and leverage Abacus Law and the security profiles in that program to help you manage all of that. So you're not needing to kind of do it in any way in an ad hoc basis. Instead, you can kind of create those profiles, apply those to individuals as needed, and then know going forward that on a record level and on a feature level within the program, an individual's kind of login controls what they can and can't do. So there's certainly kind of good security built into that. And finally, what I would recommend also is to encrypt your databases. It really does protect the data itself. Even if the data is stolen, even if it's copied off for whatever reason and whatever method, that encryption protects you. You know that client data, that client-sensitive data in your databases is protected and is not readable or available to anyone else who gains access to the raw data itself. So that's something that you can do today to protect yourself. And finally, another thing that I always recommend is if you haven't had a cybersecurity assessment in a year or even in 9 months, reach out to Abacus. It's something that we do regularly. We can generate a report that you can kind of walk away with. It's really a good way to get a sense of where you currently stand. And some things that come up is that old computer that's still connected in the closet down the hall that you weren't necessarily aware of. These assessments are something that are easy to run. They're free, right? But clearly our goal is to give you information to know exactly where you stand now and offer options, how best we can kind of help support your current environment, your cloud environment, and all to give you kind of all the access and benefits from using the technology tools that we put together as your solution, but also protect yourself and make sure that you're availing yourself of cybersecurity best practices. So definitely avail yourself of assessment if you haven't done that in the near term. All right. So thanks for your attention. I think we have a couple of questions I'd be happy to answer now with the time we have left.
Yeah, one question regarding viewing privileges in Abacus Law. Mm-hmm. Can restricted users see any documents that are saved in the file tree for a restricted matter?
That's a good question. So in the Abacus program, when let's say that Anna has access to a matter, and you've been creating documents and you store that, right? I go into the Abacus program and I would not have access to those documents. They wouldn't show up in a document search. I clearly couldn't pull up that matter record. Now, the second part of that question is, if those documents are stored in a folder, right, for that case file in our system, would I have access to them? And that really goes to a second level. With Abacus Private Cloud, that's something that's easy for us to help you administer, meaning who has access to files and folders within kind of, a directory, right? Within like all the folders and subfolders that we use to manage that information. It's kind of two permissions that we're really asking about, but both can be controlled at a user level. So that's something where, either your local IT can do the file folder, kind of permissions on a user basis, or if you're using Abacus Law in the Abacus Private Cloud, the program itself will always protect against exposure to those documents. And then at the folder level and at the file level, that's something that you can do at kind of an operating system or server level, right, which is something we can help with.
Perfect. And I think we can squeeze in one last question regarding LastPass or programs like LastPass.
Yeah.
What if their database is compromised? Wouldn't it be a risk to have all your passwords saved in one place?
Well, so that's kind of I hear that question. I think that's a smart question. So there's always going to be kind of a cost-benefit analysis, right? And what those password managers do is understand that in that password manager, you're actually storing multiple passwords. But the managers themselves are interesting in that not only they kind of design, they're built into your browser, they're built into a program that you can use, an app on your smartphone, but you also, should your server be breached, let's say, or there's a ransomware attack, you have other ways of accessing your account via the web, let's say, in order to or deauthorize, I would say, your currently used password manager password, right? So what it really does is it acts as a manager, right? So day to day, it's helping you be efficient and tracking a lot of different passwords and other information for you. Should there be a breach, it also gives you a quick way to disable all of the passwords that it's managing all at once. Does that make sense? So it does two things. One, it's meant to help you follow best practices to manage all of those strong passwords and update them regularly. But also, should all hell break loose, excuse my language, you can go into the program itself and quickly disable all of those passwords, right? So it's a nice way of giving you kind of proactive, kind of efficiencies in using strong passwords and following best practices, but also
if you need to, you can actually quickly disable all of that information that it's storing and managing for you. So it's kind of best of both, and that's really why we use it as well, because for efficiency's sake and your ability to protect yourself and reset everything very quickly, it serves both purposes.
Perfect, thank you. I think that answered the question perfectly. We're running a little over, and I do know we have a few questions left. We will reach out to you individually via email and answer your question. Thank you so much, Tomas, for hosting today's webinar, and thanks everyone for joining. A recording of today's webinar will be emailed to you shortly, and don't forget to sign up for future webinars and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.